Americans' access to cannabis as medicine is being obstructed by the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, despite overwhelming evidence and support. For over 50 years, our government has known of the medical efficacy of cannabis. Cannabis is a unique plant, perhaps the oldest cultivated by man. I believe our endocannabinoid system developed in conjunction with it. The earliest writings in medicine in almost every culture discuss cannabis as medicine. This companion plant to humanity has been medicine for 6,000 years. Our attitude in America for the last 100 does not change that fact. What you're looking at here is some of the earliest evidence of cannabis used as a drug. This was found in Western China, and it dates to a cemetery that was established between the 6th and the 8th centuries BC. Cannabis was actually discovered in the Panpao village, again in Western China, about 6,000 years ago. It was written about as one of the 5 essential grains. Now, these braziers, like you see on the bottom left, look an awful lot like what the Greek historian Herodotus wrote about in the 5th century BC when he spoke of the Scythians, and they would dig holes in the dirt, put these braziers in them, and when they threw cannabis seeds and leaves on them, he described them as shouting with joy and glee. Um, as I said, many of the earliest civilizations used cannabis and wrote about it. The illustration on the left is from the 1st century De Materia Medica. The image on the right is an Egyptian papyrus from about 1500 BC, again describing cannabis as medicine. Um, a doctor named William Brooke O'Shaughnessy in the 1800s was the most influential person in bringing cannabis to the West. He went to India in 1833. By 1839, he had written a treatise on it. You can see here that he drew it and he talked about its pain relief qualities, analgesic, anticonvulsant qualities, used it to treat migraine headaches and melancholia. Um, in fact, cannabis spread throughout the world in every culture. This map may be a little small for this demonstration, but I would urge you to seek it out because indeed cannabis has become ubiquitous. Moving on more to more recent modern history, here in America specifically, by 1937, there were more than 2,000 patent cannabis medicines made by more than 280 manufacturers. So clearly, cannabis was a medicine and accepted as such by doctors and pharmacists. Moving forward to 1960, a doctor in Israel named Ralph Mechoulam was studying it, and he isolated THC and CBD, the 2 main components of cannabis, the most 2 active ingredients, and he described them. He offered to come work in the United States for the National Institutes of Health, but was rebuffed. And by 1970, the United States under Nixon had passed the Controlled Substances Act. In that, it listed cannabis as having, quote, no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Remember, this is 1970, 55 years ago, and the DEA still describes it that way, as you'll see later. Now, our government pretty quickly showed its hypocrisy. They lost a lawsuit in 1976, and by 1978, the United States government began supplying 14 medical cannabis patients with medical cannabis grown on a farm in Mississippi. So Americans, knowing that they were being lied to, continued to use it, continued to explore it for therapeutic uses and recreational uses. And by 1999, 8 states, fortunately mine, Maine being one of them, had already passed state level cannabis laws for medical. Moving on a little bit further, in 2003, the United States government demonstrated their hypocrisy even further when they received a patent on various cannabinoids for therapeutic properties, notably CBD. At the same time, still being listed as no accepted medical use in our country. absolutely ridiculous. And by 2017, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, the most respected authorities in our country, had issued a 500 plus page report speaking of cannabis, its medical efficacy, and urging further study and research on it. In 1988, some doctors in St. Louis discovered cannabinoid receptors. Previously, it had been thought that THC was simply soluble in the cell membrane, and these doctors discovered that it actually locked into a receptor in the brain. And this spurred further research, and the doctor that I spoke of earlier in Israel, Ralph Mechoulam, isolated some endocannabinoids that our bodies make. Anandamide fits the same lock in our system that THC does. And another substance that he abbreviated as AG2 fits the CB2 receptor, the same lock in our system that CBD and CBN fit. So these discoveries really interested some doctors and continued on to research that exposed in the early 90s the body's endocannabinoid system, previously unknown to medical science. And the more they discovered, the more astounding it becomes. The endocannabinoid receptors in the human brain are the densest, largest mass of any receptors in our brain. We have endocannabinoid receptors around our body. And our endocannabinoid system, as you can see here, controls all of our bodily systems, our central nervous system, our immune system, the gastrointestinal system. It controls our metabolism, our hormones, etc. Now, my personal journey with cannabis began at 17 as I started using it for all the usual reasons to get high, rebel against authority. Following a severe accident in 2001, I began exploring edibles, extractions, salves, and tinctures because I had to quit smoking. It was at this period that I discovered cannabis is indeed medicine. My father had had a long history of skin cancer, and when my doctor discovered some on me, I asked him if I could use RSO that I had made, a simple cannabis extract, and it cured spots of skin cancer on my own body. I've cured 5 spots, and they have not recurred for 8 to 10 years. So I had an opportunity late in my dad's life, just a couple of years ago, where I had to intervene in his care. My sister had been his caregiver. Dad was 91. He had suffered some strokes, had some seizures. So things like that had taken priority in his healthcare regimen. And things like skin cancer and dermatology had taken a back seat. My sister was doing the best that she could, but I brought my dad to live with me for about a month and a half, and I decided to try some RSO on him, and I took these pictures. You can see the lesion on the bridge of his nose, and these are 20-day applications, had reduced by 2/3 of its size, and the really bad lesion on his ear was healing and forming over scab and new cells. This is in a 91-year-old man. So, these things led me to put up 2 quotes, which I know are, not recommended in PowerPoint slides, but I think it's so important that I'm going to sit here for a minute and show you that both of these say that our ECS is the most important part of our health in our bodies. Everybody needs to know this. Virtually every organ system is directly or indirectly influenced by it, and its importance can barely be overstated. Now, while most Americans don't know that, they do know about the propaganda and the lies that the US government had foisted upon us. What you're looking at here in these slides is a representation from the reefer madness era in the 30s and 40s, where a vile man named Anslinger, who was the first narcotics bureau director in the United States, waged a personal war on cannabis. Um, but flashing forward, you can see that this has not stopped. What you're looking at right here is the header page from the current United States Drug Enforcement Administration. You'll see it depicts a cannabis leaf and it talks about the main cannabinoid in cannabis, THC. This on the top of all of their pages uh, at their main website. This, despite the fact that in 2022 there were 107,000 opiate deaths, and in the DEA's own website, as you can read above that, it talks about no deaths from overdose of marijuana have been reported. And if you look to the left, there's a quote of their description of cannabis today. And it says the same thing that it said when it was written in 1970, meaning it has a high potential for abuse, no currently accepted medical use in treatment in the United States, and a lack of accepted safety for use under medical supervision. Most Americans understand that this is patently ridiculous and a bold faced lie. Here's a brief timeline of the federal cannabis prohibition. In 1970, like I said, the Controlled Substances Act went into effect. By 1972, his own appointed commission told him that cannabis should not be on that list. By 1978, as I told you earlier, the University of Mississippi was growing cannabis for patients and supplying them. Uh, NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Legislation, filed a lawsuit in 1972. The DEA drug it out till 1988 and then lost that lawsuit regarding the dangers and the medical use of cannabis. This was held in front of their own administrative law judge. That didn't matter because in 1990, the DEA administrator set aside that ruling. Then in 2001, they dismissed a major petition. In 2011, another major petition just asking for the rescheduling of cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Then in 2016, under Obama, the DEA head Chuck Rosenberg denied a petition from states' governors, again, simply asking for rescheduling from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Now, 13 years ago, a quote in Popular Science described the difficulty of scientific testing. If you're going to run a trial to show that marijuana has positive effects, the NIDA essentially is not going to allow it. That is the National Institute for Drug Abuse, and they are the federal gatekeeper for loans and grants. Uh, Both the American Medical Association and American College of Physicians have called for more research and for the government to reclassify it again 12 years ago. Now, most Americans, again, are familiar with the propaganda. You can see the ad at the top here is the Your Brain on Drugs, which was reiterated in 2016 by the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. Below is a standard DARE kit that was taken into classrooms. And you can see that the cannabis is right alongside the barbiturates and the narcotics. So 2 to 3 generations of our children began thinking all drugs were equal. And this helped to spawn the opiate epidemic that's killing those 107,000 people a year that the DEA is ignoring while they still demonize cannabis and THC. These images show you really how badly we've lost the war on drugs. We've spent over $1 trillion since it began. It's been going on for 52 years. The map on the right shows you that we have the highest prison population rate in the entire world due to our failed drug policies, even higher than Russia, which is astounding to me. At the same time, the American people knew they were being lied to. By 2017, a Marist Yahoo news report showed that 83% of Americans supported the legalization of marijuana for medical purposes. The graphic on the right shows you that 7 years later, that had risen 5% to 88. This was by Pew Research. Um, and at the same time, the states were listening to their people. 25 states took action in a 6 year period on legalization matters of cannabis. So even though the federal government was ignoring us, the state governments have been listening. Recent actions on cannabis began to be encouraging and have turned around. In 2022, Biden took a couple of actions, pardoning federal possession prisoners and directing the DHS and DOJ to look at rescheduling cannabis. In 2023, the DHS recommended to the DEA that cannabis rescheduled, and that surprised everybody. Now in 2024, the DEA pulled their same old trick. They scheduled rulemaking to take the decision out beyond the election, and we've now seen Trump appoint a drug war hawk as the head of the DEA. So, in January of this year, the DEA refused to clarify that it will follow the recommendation and the people's will. And so in 2025, Doctors for Drug Policy Reform filed a lawsuit against them. That happened actually just this month. So it's well beyond time that cannabis is accepted by our federal government as medicine. Obviously, the people of America know it. Um, uh, and the fight for access is likely to stay directly with us as the tide turns again the opposite way. So I would thank you for your time and listening to this, urge you to tell all of your friends about the endocannabinoid system, and help me be a cannabis advocate. Thank you very much.